What do you mean my account is overdrawn? That's impossible, I said, staring at my phone in mock surprise as Brandon's sister ranted about the rent money he'd promised her. He did what? When? I kept my voice steady, letting her believe I was just learning about my husband's betrayal. My name is Isla Thompson, and my husband Brandon just became one of the biggest mistakes of my life. But not in the way he thinks. That Sunday morning when I woke up to an empty bed and a cruel note on the fridge felt like a slap in the face, even though I'd been expecting it. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. Real classy, Brandon. I'm a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, and I've spent the last 15 years tracking financial fraud for some of the biggest corporations in the Midwest. So when my own husband started showing signs of planning his great escape 3 months ago, let's just say he wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur. The first red flag was when he started asking about our retirement accounts, showing sudden interest in our finances after years of letting me handle everything. Then came the secret phone calls, the unexplained absences, and the way he'd change his computer screen whenever I walked into the room. Classic signs of someone planning to bolt. I'd seen it all before in my line of work. What Brandon never realized was that every suspicious transaction, every hidden purchase, every attempt to quietly move our money, I saw it all. Each step he took to try to rob me blind was documented, photographed, and sent straight to my lawyer. By the time he left that note, thinking he'd pulled off the perfect escape, I had already moved our savings, flagged our accounts, and prepared for every scenario he might try. So when the fraud alerts started flooding my phone that Monday morning, I couldn't help but smile. Brandon thought he was 10 steps ahead, but he had no idea he was walking straight into a trap of his own making. The phone kept buzzing with notifications, declined transactions, failed withdrawal attempts, frozen accounts. Each one was like music to my ears. My hand brushed against the folder marked "Just in case" sitting on my desk, filled with months of evidence that would destroy not just his escape plan, but his entire future. As I listened to his sister's desperate voice on the phone, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You might think I was devastated, finding out my husband of 8 years never really loved me. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant. You learn to see patterns. People think they're clever when they're hiding things, but money leaves a trail. Always. And Brandon? He left breadcrumbs everywhere. I met Brandon at a charity gala 6 years ago. He was charming, successful, or so he claimed, and seemed to have his life together. He worked as an investment advisor, drove a nice car, and talked about building a future together. I was impressed by his confidence, his ambition. Looking back now, I should have noticed how he always deflected questions about his clients, how vague he was about his past. The first 3 years were good, or at least I thought they were. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs of Milwaukee, planned exotic vacations, and talked about starting a family. But there were always these little things that didn't quite add up, like how he'd get defensive whenever I asked about his student loans, or how he'd change the subject when I mentioned meeting his old colleagues. "You don't trust me?" he'd say, turning it around on me. "Why do you need to know everything? Don't you think I can handle my own finances?" Classic manipulation. I'd seen it countless times in my work, people using emotional leverage to avoid financial transparency. But I let it slide because I wanted to believe in us, in him. That was my first mistake. Then came the signs I couldn't ignore. Last Christmas, he insisted on separate accounts for our holiday spending. "It'll be more romantic if we surprise each other," he said. But I noticed the credit card statements he thought he'd hidden, showing purchases at high-end jewelry stores, jewelry I never received. The weekend business trips that didn't match any conferences I could find. The mysterious calls from numbers that always went straight to voicemail when I was around. Most wives might have confronted their husbands immediately, but I'm not most wives. Instead, I started pulling bank statements, tracking transactions, and building a case. Every time he thought he was covering his tracks, he was actually giving me more evidence. I watched as he slowly tried to drain our accounts, thinking I was oblivious to it all. "You're working late again?" he'd ask, feigning concern while I sat at my computer. Just catching up on some cases, I'd reply, not mentioning that the case I was working on was his. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I was working late, actually late this time, when my colleague Susan rushed to my desk. Her face was pale, and she was clutching her phone like it might bite her. "Isla, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. "I was reviewing the Thompson case files when I found something. It's about Brandon." My stomach dropped as I looked at her screen. There it was, Brandon's name, linked to a series of suspicious transactions we were investigating. Not as a witness or a victim, but as a person of interest. The same patterns I'd been tracking in our personal accounts were showing up in his professional dealings. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was running from something much bigger. "There's more," Susan whispered, scrolling through the documents. "He's been named in 3 other fraud investigations. Different states, different names, but the same MO. He finds successful women, marries them, then disappears with their money. The last one was in Phoenix, just before he moved to Milwaukee." The pieces started falling into place. The charm, the secrecy, the sudden interest in our finances, it was all part of his pattern. I wasn't his wife, I was his next target. And he had no idea that his latest mark was someone who specialized in catching people exactly like him. That night, I sat in our kitchen until dawn, going through everything with fresh eyes. The loving husband act, the careful manipulation, the way he'd slowly tried to isolate me from my friends and family. It was all so clear now. I found myself laughing, not because it was funny, but because of the sheer irony. He'd picked the wrong woman to con. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Every morning, I'd kiss him goodbye like nothing was wrong. Every night, I'd listen to his lies about work while documenting every suspicious transaction. I moved our savings, contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and gathered evidence that would not only protect me, but help his previous victims. "You seem different lately," he said one night, studying my face. "Is everything okay?" I smiled, thinking about the trap I'd set, about how his own arrogance would be his downfall. "Just tired from work," I replied. "You know how it gets this time of year." He nodded sympathetically, probably thinking I was working hard to earn more money for him to steal. If he'd paid more attention, he might have noticed the gleam in my eye, the one that said I knew exactly what he was planning. But con men like Brandon never think they'll be the ones getting conned. And that's the thing about people who make a living betraying others. They never expect to be the ones getting played. The morning after Brandon disappeared, his plan started unfolding exactly as he'd expected. The first call came from our bank. Unusual activity, multiple withdrawal attempts, credit cards maxed out. The second was from his sister Kelly, hysterical about the money he'd borrowed. The third was from a woman named Rachel Clark in Phoenix, asking if I knew where her husband was. Her husband. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I gripped my phone tighter, sitting down at my kitchen table. "Brandon Murphy. He's still legally my husband," Rachel explained, her voice tight with anger. "He disappeared with my savings 3 years ago. I've been tracking him ever since." I smiled despite myself. "Actually, here he went by Brandon Thompson. And you're not going to believe this, but I've been expecting your call." Over the next hour, Rachel and I compared notes. Same charming smile, same investment advisor story, same pattern of slowly draining accounts before disappearing. But this time, there was one crucial difference. Me. "I've gathered enough evidence to bring him down," I told her, "but I need your help to catch him." That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "I'm sorry, can we talk? Just one last time?" Perfect. He was following the pattern I'd discovered in Rachel's case, reaching out after the initial disappearance, trying to manipulate his way into one last chance to access any remaining funds. I showed the text to my lawyer, who was already preparing our counterattack. "Let's set the trap," she said, her eyes gleaming. I agreed to meet Brandon at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he was already there, looking appropriately remorseful. His eyes were red, his clothes slightly rumpled, the perfect picture of a man who'd made a terrible mistake. "Isla, I'm so sorry," he began, reaching for my hand across the table. "I've been going through some things, dealing with some bad investments. I panicked." I pulled my hand away, playing my part perfectly. "How much trouble are you in, Brandon?" His eyes lit up. Just a flicker, but I caught it. He thought I was falling for it. "About $200,000, but I have a plan to fix everything. I just need access to our emergency fund." I pretended to consider it, watching him squirm. "The emergency fund, right. The one you tried to empty yesterday?" His face fell for just a second before he recovered. "That was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. But if you help me now, I promise—" To what? To disappear again? Or to stick around long enough to drain my accounts like you did to Rachel in Phoenix? The color drained from his face. For the first time since I'd known him, Brandon Thompson, or Murphy, or whatever his real name was, looked genuinely shocked. "You know, the funny thing is," I continued, sliding a folder across the table, "if you'd done your research, you might have realized that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move." Just then, 2 FBI agents approached our table. I stood up, straightening my jacket. "Oh, and Brandon? You might want to call a lawyer. A good one." As Brandon was being led away by the FBI agents, my phone lit up with a call from Susan. Her timing couldn't have been better. "We've got him," she said, her voice triumphant. "The team just finished analyzing those offshore accounts you flagged. Brandon isn't just running a marriage con. He's been operating a massive Ponzi scheme. We're looking at fraud in the millions." I watched through the coffee shop window as Brandon was placed in a federal vehicle. He looked small now, nothing like the confident man who thought he'd outsmarted me. "How many victims?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be ugly. 23 so far, spanning 5 states. 12 marriages, all to successful women in finance. But here's the kicker. He was planning something bigger. We found evidence of a new investment firm he was setting up. He was going to use your credentials and reputation to lure in high-net-worth clients. I thought about all those late nights when he'd ask about my cases, showing sudden interest in my work. He wasn't being supportive. He was gathering information, planning to exploit my professional reputation for his biggest scam yet. "The irony," I said, "is that if he hadn't gotten greedy, if he'd just stuck to his usual marriage scam, he might have gotten away again, but he just had to go bigger." "That's not even the best part," Susan continued. "Remember that country club membership he insisted on last year? Turns out he was using it to meet his next target, Caroline Mitchell, the hedge fund manager. He was already laying the groundwork for his next disappearing act." I recalled all the Sunday golf games, the late-night networking events. While he was playing the devoted husband at home, he was setting up his next victim. But Caroline Mitchell wasn't just any hedge fund manager. She was one of my closest friends, and she'd been working with me to document Brandon's every move for months. "Let me guess," I said. "Caroline gave you access to all their private conversations?" "Every email, every text, every recorded conversation in the club lounge. He literally handed us a blueprint of his entire operation while trying to seduce her. The guy practically wrote our case for us." I couldn't help but laugh. Brandon had spent months meticulously planning his exit, thinking he was the smartest person in the room. Meanwhile, every person he thought he was manipulating had been working together, building an airtight case against him. "Have you heard from his sister Kelly?" I asked, thinking about her frantic call this morning. "That's another interesting thread," Susan replied. "Turns out she's not his sister at all. She's an accomplice. They've been running this scam together for years. She plays the desperate sister to explain why he needs to borrow money urgently right before he disappears. She's being picked up in Chicago as we speak." I sat back in my chair, taking it all in. The scope of Brandon's deception was breathtaking, but so was his blindness. He'd been so focused on maintaining his lies that he never noticed the trap closing around him. "One more thing," Susan added. "We found his real identity. His name isn't Brandon Thompson or Murphy, it's Brandon Roberts. and he's been wanted for fraud in Canada since 2015. I smiled, thinking about the massive case file waiting on my desk. Well, Brandon Roberts, welcome to your worst nightmare. I was about to head back to the office when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. You think you're clever, but you have no idea what's coming. Check your email. The message was followed by an email containing detailed photos of me with my family, my daily routines, even shots through my home windows. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from anger. Brandon had hired someone to watch me. I forwarded everything to Susan and my lawyer, then made a call to the FBI agent in charge of Brandon's case. Agent Morrison? We've got another player in the game. Already on it, she replied. The photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring. James Foster, Brandon's former cellmate from a brief stint in Phoenix. He's been working as Brandon's muscle, threatening victims who get too close to exposing the scheme. I thought about Rachel Clark, wondering if this was why she'd waited so long to come forward. Where is he now? That's the thing, we can't locate him, but he's probably... Agent Morrison stopped mid-sentence. Hold on. There's movement on one of Brandon's frozen accounts. Someone's trying to access it from inside your house. My house. Where I'd left my laptop open. I called Rachel immediately. Is everything okay there? We have a situation, she whispered. Kelly's here. She must have had a key. She's trying to access Brandon's accounts from your computer. Kelly, the fake sister, who was supposed to be in custody in Chicago. My mind raced through the possibilities. Either she'd escaped or... Rachel, get out of there now. Kelly's not working alone. I heard a crash in the background, followed by Rachel's sharp intake of breath. Too late, Foster's here too. My heart pounded, but my mind remained clear. This was exactly the kind of desperate move I'd anticipated. Rachel, remember what we discussed? It's time. Through the phone, I heard Rachel's calm voice. Hey, Kelly, before you do anything stupid, you might want to look at what's on that screen. I smiled, knowing exactly what they were seeing. Every file, every account, every piece of evidence wasn't just stored on my laptop. It was being live-streamed to the FBI's servers. Plus, the whole house was under surveillance with agents stationed nearby. It's over, I heard Rachel say. Look outside. The sound of sirens filled the background as FBI agents swarmed my house. Within minutes, both Kelly and Foster were in custody, and Rachel was safe. I drove home to find Agent Morrison waiting for me. Quite a performance, she said. You knew they'd try something like this? People like Brandon, Kelly, and Foster, they always get desperate at the end. They're so used to being in control that they can't handle losing it. I looked at my house, now a crime scene. I just had to make them think they had one last chance to win. Well, with this attempted break-in and the threats, we can add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their list. Agent Morrison smiled. I'd say your trap worked perfectly. I thought about Brandon sitting in his cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this. He had no idea that his desperate final move had just given us everything we needed to ensure he'd never scam anyone again. 2 months later, I sat in the courtroom watching Brandon's world crumble around him. Gone was the confident smile, replaced by a look of utter defeat as the judge read out his sentence. Brandon Roberts, for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. I caught his eye as they led him away. For a moment, his mask slipped completely, and I saw the panic beneath. The man who'd written "Never loved you anyway" on a note in my fridge now faced a future where love was the least of his concerns. Kelly and Foster didn't fare much better. Both took plea deals, but they'd still serve significant time. As part of their agreements, they provided evidence against Brandon's entire network, exposing operations in 3 countries. Rachel sat beside me, squeezing my hand as Brandon's victims, my unexpected sisters in survival, stood one by one to share their impact statements. Each woman told a similar story of betrayal, but ended with the same note of triumph. We'd not only gotten justice, we'd gotten our power back. After the sentencing, Agent Morrison approached me with a smile. The Bureau could use someone with your skills. Have you ever considered consulting for us? I thought about all the other Brandons out there, all the scammers who thought they were too clever to get caught. You know what? I think I'd like that. Yeah. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Milwaukee sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. Brandon thought he'd destroyed me, but he'd only made me stronger. And now I had a new mission, ensuring he would be the last con man to underestimate a woman with a talent for numbers and a mind for justice. 6 months after Brandon's sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee. Behind me was a presentation detailing what they now called the Thompson case, though that wasn't his real name or mine anymore. I'd taken back my maiden name, wanting nothing to do with any of Brandon's aliases. The modern con artist doesn't use a gun, I told the room full of agents and analysts. They use trust, manipulation, and technology. But they all leave a trail. You just have to know where to look. The program I'd developed with the FBI was already showing results. 3 major romance scam rings had been busted in the past month alone. Rachel had become one of our most valuable consultants, her experience helping us understand how these predators chose their targets. After the presentation, I checked my phone to find a message from Susan. Another victim of Brandon's had been located in Vancouver. Unlike the rest of us, she'd lost everything: her house, her savings, her business. But this time, we could help her recover what was stolen. The forensic team had finally cracked Brandon's encrypted files, revealing accounts he'd hidden all over the world. I thought about that Sunday morning when I'd found his note, how he'd tried to break me with 5 cruel words. Instead, he'd given me a gift, the chance to help others fight back against people like him. My new apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, and as I sat on my balcony that evening, I smiled at the irony. Brandon had spent his life taking things from strong women, but in the end, he'd inadvertently created something powerful. A network of survivors turned warriors, all dedicated to taking down men like him. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just surviving, it's thriving.